Ashley Cooper keeps her hands perfectly steady as she adjusts the fall line for the blind veteran in room for 12, even though her jaw muscle twitches once before going still. The plastic bag of saline hangs above Colonel James Patterson's head like a clear thought waiting to crystallize, and she checks the flow rate, 23 milliliters per hour, prescribed and exact, without writing anything down because she remembers numbers the way some people remember names. 14 years of nursing. 3 tours that never appeared in her resume. Her fingers find the tape securing the needle with the same precision she once used to pack chest wounds in caves outside Bagram, where pain was information and information kept people alive. The room smells like antiseptic and flowers. Patterson's daughter Margaret fussed with a bouquet of yellow roses for the last 10 minutes, arranging them on the windowsill with the determined focus of someone trying to make a hospital room feel less like surrender. She's gone to find coffee now, leaving Ashley and the blind veteran alone with the hum of the ventilation system and the soft beep of the cardiac monitor, steady at 68 beats per minute. Patterson's scarred face points toward the window even though he can't see through it. The left side of his face still bears the silvery mapping of burns from 2007, shrapnel from a roadside explosion in Helmand Province. He wore the rank of colonel for 23 years before the light went out. Now he wears a hospital gown and the particular patience of men who've already lost everything that mattered. "You done, nurse?" His voice is gravel in a throat that's learned not to waste air on questions he already knows the answers to. "One more second, sir." She doesn't call him colonel. The hospital doesn't allow rank in the patient relationship, and Ashley learned long ago that the best way to be invisible is to follow every rule that's written down and ignore all the ones that aren't. The 4 tape catches slightly on his arm hair, and she lets it, because removing it cleanly requires 2 hands and she's already decided he's the kind of man who doesn't want her fussing. She secures the needle with practiced economy of movement. All set. Margaret should be back in about 5 minutes. Patterson nods, and his head tilts slightly, tracking the sound of her footsteps as she moves toward the chair where her jacket hangs. Something flickers across his face, a quick brightness like a match being struck, but it's gone before she can interpret it. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead with the sound of 10,000 small electrical deaths, and Ashley has learned to work inside that sound without letting it become silence. Silence is when the mind wanders. Silence is when you start remembering caves and blood spray patterns and the specific weight of someone else's body going limp in your arms. She reaches for her jacket. The sleeve shifts as she pulls it down from the chair, and the fabric peels back just enough to reveal what's sewn into the lining, a faded unit patch, crossed arrows over a skull, so worn the edges have begun to fray into individual threads. SFOD Delta. The letters don't register as words anymore. They're just shapes, like scars. Like muscle memory. Like things your body knows before your brain gets permission to think about them. Dr. Mercer appears in the doorway the way expensive men always appear, like the light in the room should have adjusted to accommodate him. His watch is a $12,000 Omega Seamaster, the kind of purchase that announces itself before his voice does. He's been at Cedar Creek Medical for 4 years, and in that time he's cultivated the posture of someone who believes that power accumulates in the spaces between other people's conversations. His eyes scan the room with the calculating assessment of a man inventorying assets, and his gaze lands on Ashley like she's a problem still waiting to be solved. Miss Cooper. Not Nurse Cooper. Not Ashley. The deliberate removal of her title is so practiced it barely registers anymore, though her jaw goes tight. A word before you leave. Ashley turns. Her expression is a smooth surface, the kind of blank that comes from 18 years of practice, 12 of them in places where showing emotion was a liability and 6 of them in this hospital learning that civilian workplaces have different rules for the same skill. Of course, Doctor. The way she says his title is perfect. Respectful. Deferential. Everything he's teaching her to be. She glances back at Patterson, and the blind veteran's head has turned slightly toward the sound of Mercer's voice, his scarred face unreadable. Margaret bustles back into the room with 2 paper cups of coffee, and the moment closes like a door. Ashley steps into the hallway with Mercer following behind her, his footsteps sharper than hers, more insistent, as if he needs the floor to know he's there. The break room is empty when she walks in. For nurses who were reading charts and drinking lukewarm coffee from the carafe stand simultaneously and leave without a word, collecting themselves like birds recognizing a predator. Their exit is so synchronized it might be funny, except nothing about this moment is designed to be funny. Ashley sets her lunch bag in the refrigerator, a plastic container of grilled chicken and asparagus that required 4 minutes of meal prep on her Sunday night, and moves to the window. Outside, Colorado Springs sprawls under a November sky that can't decide between rain and clarity. The unit board near the elevator displays her name in red marker. Not blue like the other staff. Red. Underneath, in handwriting that looks like Dr. Mercer's but could belong to anyone with access and intent, someone has written, disciplinary action, insubordination. The letters are block printed and confident. Below that, another line, pending review. She reads it the way she reads vital signs, extracting information without judgment, cataloging facts. Her hands, when she looks down at them, are steady. The knuckles are webbed with thin white scars shaped like rifle grips, where calluses wore through the skin during 8 years of weapons handling at Bagram. Nobody here asks about those scars. Everyone here has learned, by now, not to ask questions about Ashley Cooper's past. The ones who haven't learned usually approach her anyway, and then she deflects so smoothly they believe they never wanted to know in the first place. She takes a bite of her sandwich at the counter, standing alone now that the other nurses have gone. The chicken is cold and perfectly seasoned, the way cold chicken should be. She eats it without tasting it, the way you eat when your body is fuel and fuel is function. Around her, the hospital continues its work, ventilators wheeze their mechanical rhythm somewhere below this floor, elevators open and close with the sound of pneumatic sighs, a code blue announcement crackles from the intercom in a voice that's learned to make emergency sound routine. 7 years of cardiac events, stroke alerts, and trauma activations have taught her that urgency is just a tone of voice if you practice it enough times. Her phone buzzes in her pocket. A text message from her son, Ryan, 14 years old and smart enough to know something is wrong even though she's taught him for 14 years not to ask directly about things that matter. The text reads, "Why are you home early?" Mom. She'd come home at 2:51 p.m. that afternoon, 3 hours before her shift was supposed to end. She'd pulled into the driveway, seen his bike abandoned on the front lawn, and sat in the car for 8 minutes before getting out. She has no plan for what to tell him. The truth, that Dr. Mercer is assembling a file against her with the methodical precision of someone who knows exactly which infractions to cite and which to ignore, feels too heavy for a 14-year-old's shoulders. The lie, that she's fine, that work is just fine, that everything is fine, feels like the same thing, because Ryan has learned to read her face the way some people read maps. She types back, different schedule. I'm home early. How's homework? 3 dots appear, disappear, appear again. Then, did they fire you? The precision of his fear is sharp. She sets the phone down and finishes her sandwich. The thing about people who've been trained to function in chaos is that the ordinary machinery of civilian disappointment never quite feels real. A disciplinary action. A red marker on a bulletin board. Colleagues who can't quite make eye contact in the supply closet. These are the small degradations that break people who've lived inside predictable systems. For Ashley, they're just information. Data. The same way she reads Patterson's cardiac rhythm or the subtle shift in someone's breathing that indicates pain before they'll admit to it. Her body processes every humiliation and catalogues it somewhere it can't hurt, the way it's been trained to do. She opens her locker at 3:15 p.m. Inside, everything is exactly as she left it, her backup stethoscope coiled like a snake around a roll of gauze, her badge clipped to the same hook where it always sits, a photo of Ryan taped to the metal door, taken 6 months ago when his hairline still looked like it belonged to a child. She looks at his face and thinks about fathers who come home and don't come home, about Colonel Patterson upstairs in room for 12 with his blind eyes and his scars that run deeper than skin, about the specific architecture of loss that teaches you to say nothing, need nothing, become nothing. Her jaw tightens. She reaches up and presses her finger against the scar on her left temple, thin white line above the hairline where shrapnel went in and came out and left a memory that her brain categorizes as pain but her body recognizes as survival. The muscle under her jaw works once, a single involuntary tremor of something that might be anger or might be the years of training teaching her that anger is a luxury she can't afford. Then it stops. Her face smooths. She closes the locker and walks out of the break room like she's done this 1,000 times before. Which, in a sense, she has. She closes the locker and walks out of the break room like she's done this 1,000 times before. Which, in a sense, she has. Room for 12 smells like antiseptic and something else, fear, maybe, the sharp copper edge of it. Dr. Mercer is already there when Ashley pushes through the door, his white coat pristine, his clipboard thick enough to be a weapon. He's holding it like one. Colonel Patterson sits on the hospital bed, his eyes unfocused behind the darkness of his condition, but his shoulders are tense. Margaret, his daughter, stands at the foot of the mattress, her hand resting on the frame like she's steadying herself. Nurse Cooper, Mercer says, his voice pitched loud enough to carry through the open doorway and down the corridor to the nurse's station where Sarah and 2 others are logging patient data. Your persistent deviation from established protocols is becoming a liability. Ashley's hands don't pause. She adjusts the fall line with the precision of someone who has done this 8,000 times, maybe 9,000. Her fingers move like surgical instruments, steady, exact, immune to the fact that half the floor just stopped typing to listen. Mercer flips pages, each one snapping against the clipboard like gunshots in the sudden silence. Unapproved wound care techniques on Mr. Patterson's bedsores, he reads, his tone suggesting his discovered evidence of gross negligence instead of superior outcomes. Excessive time with non-critical patients. Questioning pharmaceutical orders from attending physicians. He pauses, letting that last one hang. Perhaps Nightingale here believes her nursing diploma makes her qualified to override medical doctors. 2 residents pass in the hallway and slow their steps without meaning to. The intercom hums overhead but stays silent, like even the hospital's electronic voice is listening. Margaret's face is doing something complicated, confusion mixed with the first threads of doubt. She looks at her father. His jaw is set, but his blind eyes are pointed at the sound of Mercer's voice like he's trying to see through darkness. Ashley meets Mercer's stare and lets her jaw go flat. Empty. I'll review the documentation, doctor, she says, and her voice is the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst, a monotone wrapped in complete absence of effect. She doesn't apologize. Doesn't defend. Doesn't give him the reaction he's hunting for. Mercer's smile hardens at the edges. He's used to nurses who break under that kind of public humiliation. He's used to tears or anger or desperate explanations. What he gets instead is a woman adjusting a saline drip like he isn't there, like his words are weather passing over stone. See that you do, he says, and leaves the clipboard on the chair like he's marking territory. The nurse's station resume's typing 3 seconds after he's gone, but the rhythm is different now, faster, nervous. Margaret reaches out and touches her father's hand. He's just being careful, Dad, she whispers, but she doesn't sound convinced. That afternoon, Ashley carries her lunch into the break room and sits at a table by the window where rain is starting to streak the glass. For nurses, Sarah, the resident she trained on suture technique, Marcus, who used to ask her opinion on complicated patients, Jennifer and Tom from the night shift, look up from their trays. They don't look at each other. They don't coordinate. They just stand, almost in unison, and leave. The chairs scrape against linoleum in succession, a sound like applause in reverse. She unwraps her sandwich. Turkey and mustard on wheat. Something normal. Something that tastes like cardboard when you're watching your own isolation being constructed in real time. The other table's conversations continue, quieter now, more careful. People are choosing their words. People are choosing their distance. The unit board near the elevator displays her name in red marker under a section that reads disciplinary action, insubordination. The words are thick and blocky, meant to be seen from 30 feet away. Meant to be noticed by patients and families checking in, by pharmaceutical representatives and janitors and anyone walking past. Ashley takes a bite of her sandwich with mechanical precision. Chews. Swallows. Her jaw muscle twitches once, just once, before she forces it still. This is discipline. This is what happens when you've learned to control everything, including the small betrayals your own body wants to offer up. She learned this skill in a different uniform, in different rooms, in places where a flinch could get people killed. The fluorescent lights above her head buzz and flicker. She finishes half the sandwich and throws the rest away. That evening, passing two orderlies in the supply corridor, she notices they stop talking mid-sentence and study their shoes with sudden, intense focus until she rounds the corner toward the locker rooms. When she checks the staff schedule posted near the time clock, her name is no longer listed for Colonel Patterson's care rotation. The change was made without notification, without explanation. Just erased. She stands at the scheduling board for 30 seconds. Her hand comes up to touch the jacket in her locker, where the faded unit patch is sewn into the lining. Dark Horse, 3rd Battalion, the ghost of a life she was supposed to leave behind. The threads are worn smooth from years of fingers finding it in the dark, proof of something. Proof of someone. The next morning, she finds Colonel Patterson's chart flagged for medication review. Mercer's signature authorizes an increase in sedative dosage that contradicts the documented clinical note she wrote 3 days ago: respiratory sensitivity, mild COPD history, caution with CNS depressants. The chart is sitting at the nurse's station, and she picks it up like it's routine, like her name in red ink on that board didn't change everything. But the numbers tell a different story. She traces the billing codes with her finger: phantom MRIs listed for patients who never left their rooms, equipment charges for devices she's never seen in those rooms, supplier codes that repeat like a pattern across multiple patient files. Her mind works the way it was trained to work, pattern recognition as muscle memory. She's sorting signatures, identifying inconsistencies, the same skill that once meant spotting IED triggers in dust patterns at a checkpoint near Bagram. Kickback arrangements. Inflated equipment charges. Insurance fraud written in clinical notation. Is there a problem, Nightingale? Mercer's voice arrives before she sees him. He's standing beside her at the nurse's station, and his smile is the smile of someone who knows he's winning. She didn't hear him approach, which means she was too focused, which means she made a mistake. Just reviewing care continuity, Ashley says. Her voice is flat. Institutional. The voice of a nurse, nothing more. Colonel Patterson isn't your patient anymore, Mercer says quietly, and only she can hear it. His smile doesn't change. You're on detox ward rotation as of today. Consider it an opportunity to follow protocols more carefully. Ashley nods once. She closes the chart and sets it back on the counter. She walks away before he can say anything else, before the anger she's controlling like a leashed animal can show itself. But she remembers every billing code. She remembers the supplier names. She remembers the pattern. That afternoon, Margaret finds her in the hallway during the break shift. The daughter looks smaller than she did this morning, worn down by something. He's getting worse, Margaret whispers. Dad says something feels wrong in his chest, but Dr. Mercer says it's anxiety. Ashley stops walking. She turns to face Colonel Patterson's daughter, and something in her expression must shift because Margaret takes a small step back. Has he had trouble breathing? Ashley asks. Yes, but... The calculation happens in less than a second. Ashley has been trained to weigh regulations against instinct, policy against necessity, career against conscience. She learned those equations on a mountain, and they didn't get easier with time. I'll check on him, she says. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was knowing that Mercer was already waiting for her to do exactly this. The morning shift report sat on Ashley's desk like a loaded weapon. Room for 12, Colonel Patterson's chart, flagged in red, medication review, sedative protocol adjustment authorized. The signature belonged to Dr. Mercer. The authorization contradicted everything in the veteran's file. Penicillin allergy, documented. Sulfur drug sensitivity, documented. But the sedative increase? A benzodiazepine class that carried a black box warning for patients with respiratory compromise. Colonel Patterson's service record listed 2 collapsed lungs from IED shrapnel. Mercer knew that. The chart was right there. Ashley's jaw clenched once, then went still. This wasn't incompetence. This was execution disguised as medicine. The hospital corridors felt narrower as she walked toward detox rotation, the fluorescent lights humming their mechanical song overhead, casting everything in that sickly yellow that made skin look like it belonged to corpses. 23 nurses passed her in the hallway. None of them made eye contact. The unit board near the elevator still displayed her name in red marker, disciplinary action, insubordination. But her feet carried her past detox. Her hands, which had sutured femoral arteries in cave systems while mortars screamed outside, could absolutely reach room for 12 without being noticed. Just had to time it right. Just had to move like someone who belonged there. The door to room for 12 swung open and every instrument in her body went red alert. Colonel Patterson's breathing was rapid, shallow, the kind of gasping that came from a chest cavity filling with it that had nowhere to go. His blind eyes were wide, unseeing, his right hand clutching at the surgical scar on his chest like he could squeeze the life back into it. His daughter Margaret stood frozen by the bedside, foam trembling in her grip, and his neck, his neck, showed the distended jugular veins that meant the pressure inside his thorax had crossed from critical to catastrophic. How long has he been like this? Ashley moved to the bedside, already reaching for the stethoscope around her neck, her voice dropping into the register that had commanded men under fire. Margaret's answer came in fragments, 10 minutes, maybe more. I called for Dr. Mercer but he said to wait, said the afternoon rounds were. Ashley's stethoscope found the left chest wall and heard nothing. Silence where breath sounds should have been. The right side wheezed and crackled, working overtime to compensate. Tracheal deviation. The subtle shift of his windpipe pulling away from the pressure building like a grenade inside his left thorax. Tension pneumothorax. Misdiagnosis. Critical decompensation. 60 seconds until cardiac arrest. Ashley's hand moved to the code button, pressed it once, and the unit erupted. 2 residents sprinted through the doorway, movement and urgency and youth, and then they froze. Dr. Mercer stood in the threshold like a wall made of starched white coat and institutional authority, arms crossed, his presence shifting the air pressure in the room the way a predator's arrival shifts the behavior of prey. Nurse Cooper, you are not assigned to this patient. Step away from the bed immediately. The words came out with the precision of a scalpel, meant to cut clean and final. Colonel Patterson's lips were transitioning from pink to blue, his breathing becoming more labored, the sound of air hunger, a sound Ashley had heard in a cave outside Bagram when a soldier named Chen took shrapnel in the 3rd intercostal space and the pneumothorax started collapsing his lung. She'd performed a needle decompression then using a 14-gauge angiocath from an aid bag and the hiss of escaping air had been the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard because it meant he breathed for another 3 hours until the medevac came. He needs immediate decompression or heal code in 60 seconds, Ashley said, her voice dropping another octave, carrying now the command weight of an officer who had moved through darkness with men's lives balanced on her decisions. Her hands were already moving toward the crash cart, muscle memory and training overriding protocol, overriding consequence, overriding the man in the doorway who thought paperwork could stop muscle memory. That's a physician's determination, not yours, Mercer snapped, and this was the thing that made Ashley absolutely certain of what he'd done, he didn't move toward the patient. He didn't assess the tracheal deviation. He didn't listen to the absent breath sounds. He didn't reach for an oxygen mask or call for an on-call surgeon. He just stood there, blocking the doorway like he could will the veteran to die if he refused to look at it. Margaret's voice cracked across the room, please, somebody help him, and that was the moment the choice stopped being a choice. Ashley's hands found the needle decompression kit, her fingers moving through the ritual of preparation like conducting a symphony she'd performed 1,000 times, skin antiseptic, locate the landmark, 2nd intercostal space, midclavicular line, calculate the depth, grip the needle between thumb and first 2 fingers like this was the only thing that mattered in the universe because it was. Mercer's face went dark red, the color of rage meeting the wall of his own irrelevance. If you perform that procedure, you will never work in this hospital again. His voice rose to fill the space, trying to reclaim authority through volume, through threat, through the institutional power that had worked on every other person who'd ever stood in this hospital and been told they didn't belong. Ashley didn't look at him. She looked at Colonel Patterson, at the blind veteran whose daughter's hand was shaking, whose lungs were collapsing, whose death was scheduled to happen in the next minute unless Ashley drove a needle through his chest wall and broke every rule Mercer had ever written. "Noted, Doctor," she said, and her voice carried the calm of someone who had already survived the worst that could happen. She didn't feel the needle slide through skin and muscle. She felt the hiss of air escaping, the sudden pressure release, the immediate change in Colonel Patterson's breathing as his collapsed lung re-expanded and oxygen began flowing again. The monitor's rhythm changed from the frantic pace of hypoxia back toward something that resembled normal, his oxygen saturation climbing from 68 up to 73, 78, 82. Margaret made a sound like a prayer answered. One of the residents moved to call for the surgeon, the real surgeon, the one who'd now be coming to place a chest tube and manage this properly. But in the doorway, Dr. Mercer's face had transformed into something that looked like a man watching his house collapse. His mouth opened and closed without words, and what happened next didn't just silence the room, it brought the entire third floor to a standstill. The click of his shoes on tile as he turned and walked back toward his office. The sound every hospital understood the moment someone decided to end a career. Ashley kept her hand steady on the needle, her eyes on Colonel Patterson's vital signs, her breathing measured and controlled even as the implications arranged themselves like dominoes waiting for the first one to fall. She had just performed an advanced medical procedure outside her scope of practice. She had just directly violated a direct order from an attending physician. She had just saved a man's life, and in doing so, signed the final document on her employment at Cedar Creek Medical. But Colonel Patterson was breathing. The monitor showed sinus rhythm returning, his oxygen climbing toward normal range, his body understanding that the threat had passed. Margaret leaned forward and gripped Ashley's shoulder, tears running down her face, and she didn't say anything because there were no words big enough for what had just happened. The two residents stood frozen, understanding that they'd just witnessed something that would require incident reports and probably depositions. Ashley reached into her pocket and felt the shape of the faded unit patch she kept sewn inside her jacket lining, the one made from a Black Hawk helicopter that had crashed outside Kandahar in 2008 with 8 soldiers on board. She'd stitched it into her civilian life like a prayer no one was supposed to know about. Now it felt heavier than it ever had, weighted with the knowledge that Mercer was already in his office, already calling hospital administration, already framing her actions as insubordination rather than heroism. The afternoon sun slanted through the window in room for 12, and Ashley Cooper, the woman who'd trained for 3 years to be invisible, who'd served in a war that was classified deeper than most people's security clearances, who'd spent 8 years pretending to be just a nurse with steady hands and a quiet voice, stood at the bedside of a dying man she'd just saved and waited for the consequences of being exactly who she was. The needle went in. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. Ashley's hands moved with the precision of someone who'd done this in a cave outside Bagram while mortar rounds shook the stone walls, who'd performed surgical miracles with equipment that amounted to scissors and prayer. The trapped air hissed, a sound like pressure bleeding from a tire, like relief, like a man's last chance being given back to him. Colonel Patterson's chest decompressed. His breathing deepened immediately, the shallow gasping replaced by something real, something that carried oxygen to lungs that had been collapsing in on themselves. Color flooded back into his lips. Margaret sobbed, her hand gripping the bedside rail so hard her knuckles turned white, and when she looked at Ashley, her eyes held something that looked like resurrection. Vitals climbing, Ashley said quietly to the two residents who stood frozen like statues carved from shock. Her voice dropped an octave. Get a chest tube kit. 28 French. Now. They moved. Not because she had the authority to order them, she didn't, not officially, not according to Colorado Medical Practice Act Section 12-255-112 or any piece of paper Dr. Mercer could wave around. They moved because her voice carried the weight of someone who'd barked commands in firefights, who'd decided who lived and who didn't, who'd walked through war with her hand steady and her mind sharper than any blade. Margaret's sobs turned to something quieter, something that sounded like prayer. Ashley checked Patterson's O2 saturation. Climbing. 78%. 82%. 87%. His pulse steadied from the panicked 142 of someone whose body was suffocating to a more measured rhythm, still elevated, but rational. The blind veteran's hand found hers, gripped it with the strength of a man whose daughter had just watched him die and then watched him breathe again. "Thank you," Margaret whispered. Dr. Mercer stood in the doorway, watching. His expression didn't change, not visibly, but something shifted behind his eyes, a calculation, a course correction. He'd come expecting to find a crisis he could contain, a failure he could weaponize. Instead, he'd found a woman with hands steady as surgical lasers saving a life with nothing but a nurse's scissors and muscle memory from a war that didn't officially exist. He turned and left. Ashley heard him before she saw him again, his voice in the hallway, crisp and clipped, reaching for his phone. "I need to speak with hospital administration immediately." The words carried back through the open door like something toxic seeping under a sealed threshold. Immediate complaint. Protocol violation. Colorado Medical Practice Act Section 12-255-112. Outside scope of practice. His voice had the tone of someone reading from a script he'd prepared hours ago, waiting for exactly this justification to deploy it. The chest tube kit arrived. Ashley inserted it with the same mechanical precision she used to breathe, inhale, exhale, next task, next patient, no time for the knowledge that her career was being filed away in some administrative folder while she worked. 90 seconds, the procedure took. That was all. In 90 seconds, she transformed a pneumothorax from a death sentence into a manageable problem. She dressed the wound, secured the tube, checked the bubbling in the underwater seal chamber that confirmed it was draining properly. "The surgeon will be here soon," she told Margaret quietly, her voice settling back into the register of someone who was supposed to be just a nurse. "He's going to be fine." Colonel Patterson squeezed her hand once more, and when she looked at him, his blind eyes were pointed directly at her, as if he could see something that everyone else in the room had missed. An hour passed. Maybe 90 minutes. Ashley finished her charting in the medication room, her hands moving through documentation with the same steady precision they'd used on Patterson's chest. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, that constant background hum that most people stopped hearing after their first week in a hospital. She didn't stop hearing it. In combat, she'd learned that background noise was information. The lights hummed. The ventilators wheezed. The monitors beeped in their steady electronic rhythms. The medication room door opened. "Miss Cooper, you need to come with me." The security officer was young, African-American, with the kind of polite firmness that suggested he'd done this before but didn't particularly enjoy it. Ashley recognized the tone. It was the voice of someone following orders he didn't fully understand. She closed the medication cabinet, logged out of the computer, and turned to face him without any visible reaction. The walk through the ICU felt endless. It was 73 meters, she counted, something her brain did automatically in spaces that mattered. Past the medication alcove where Sarah and Jennifer had been standing 10 minutes ago, both of them suddenly finding urgent reasons to be somewhere else. Past the unit board near the elevator where her name was still written in red marker, though the words beneath it had changed. Where it had said disciplinary action, insubordination, someone had now added a second line, suspension pending termination review. She didn't flinch. Her jaw tightened once, a small betrayal of the composure that had kept her alive in places where betraying emotion meant getting killed. Then it settled back to stillness. Dr. Mercer watched from his office doorway as she passed. He didn't step into her path or speak. He just watched, the expression on his face carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd successfully removed a problem before it could grow teeth and bite back. The HR office was on the 3rd floor, in a section of Cedar Creek Medical that most nurses never visited. Beige walls. Fluorescent lighting that was somehow worse than the lighting in the hospital proper. A woman in a grey suit sat behind a desk that was aggressively clean, as if the cleanliness itself was meant to convey a message about order and consequences. "Ms. Cooper, I'm Diana Voss, Hospital Employment Administrator." The woman didn't smile. She slid a document across the desk with 2 fingers, the way someone might slide a restraining order across a judge's bench. This is a notice of suspension, effective immediately. You're barred from hospital property pending a review of your conduct in room for 12 today. Ashley looked at the document without touching it. The words swam in their careful bureaucratic language: insubordination, outside scope of practice, Colorado Medical Practice Act Section 12-255-112, pending termination review, immediate suspension, badge and hospital credentials to be surrendered immediately. Colonel Patterson crashed, Ashley said. Her voice was completely flat. Tension pneumothorax. Misdiagnosis. That's a matter for the investigation, Voss said. Your badge and keys. Now. Ashley unfastened her hospital badge from her scrub pocket. She'd worn it every single day for 8 years, the laminated photo showing a face that looked simultaneously younger and older than the one she wore now. She placed it on the desk. Her keys followed, the one for the medication cabinet, the one for the supply closet, the master key that gave her access to most of Cedar Creek Medical's restricted areas. Voss placed them in a manila envelope without comment. The security officer walked her out through the main lobby. It was mid-afternoon, shift change time, and a dozen people saw her leave, her name in red marker on the unit board, a nurse escorted from the building by security, the story that would spread through Cedar Creek Medical like infection through a wound. By evening, everyone would know. By the next morning, the carefully constructed narrative would be complete. Dr. Mercer had removed a problem nurse before she could hurt someone. Nobody saw the blind veteran she'd just saved. Her car was in the employee lot. The drive home took 23 minutes. Ashley sat through 3 red lights without really processing them, her hands gripping the steering wheel hard enough that the knuckles turned white. The suspension notice sat on the passenger seat, accusation made paper. Home was a 3-bedroom colonial in a quiet neighborhood 8 miles from Cedar Creek Medical. The house was too big for just her and Ryan, but she'd bought it 8 years ago when she was supposed to be building a life, establishing normalcy, becoming someone that no one would ever think to look at twice. It had worked until it didn't. Ryan found her at the kitchen table at 6:11 p.m. She knew the exact time because she'd been staring at the clock for 42 minutes, watching the numbers change, waiting for her brain to process what came next. Mom? Why are you home early? His voice was small. Confused. 14 years old and still believing that most things made sense, that his mother was just a nurse with steady hands, that the world operated on rational rules that didn't suddenly flip over and expose everything underneath. Ashley couldn't form the words. She opened her mouth and nothing came. The tears came instead, something that hadn't happened in 8 years, not since the day she got the phone call telling her that Operation Granite Shadow had been erased, that she'd been officially discharged into civilian life, that her records were being sealed so deep that it would take a Pentagon authorization to even confirm she'd existed. 8 years of holding everything behind her eyes, and it broke in the kitchen of a house in Colorado Springs while her 14-year-old son watched her fall apart. She reached for him without speaking, pulled him close, and let him hold her while the afternoon light faded outside the kitchen window. He didn't understand. He didn't ask questions. He just stood there, present in the way that children were when their parents were breaking, offering nothing but the fact of his existence and his willingness to stay. That was all she had now. That was all anyone ever had. Ryan walks into Cedar Creek Medical with the wooden shadow box held against his chest like a shield, his 14-year-old frame somehow smaller under the weight of what he's carrying. The lobby is crowded, morning shift change, families waiting, the usual controlled chaos of a hospital coming alive. He approaches the administrator's desk with the kind of purpose that makes people stop and notice. His voice shakes when he speaks, not from fear but from the magnitude of what he's about to do. Excuse me. I need to talk to someone in charge. My mom, they need to see these. They need to know who she really is. The administrator, a woman named Patricia Chen, looks up from her computer with the practiced patience of someone used to disrupted mornings. She has no idea that the next 60 seconds will unravel everything she approved yesterday. The lobby doors slide open and Colonel James Patterson is wheeled in by his daughter Margaret, the blind veteran's cane resting across his lap, his weathered face calm as always. He doesn't know yet what's about to happen. He just knows his follow-up appointment is at 9 o'clock and his body still needs checking. But when his hand reaches out and touches Ashley's shoulder, she's standing there now, frozen between her son and the administrator. His entire posture changes. His blind eyes tilt upward as if he can suddenly see something in the air between them. 3 words escape his lips, words that haven't been spoken in 8 years, words that belong to a woman who no longer officially exists. Falcon 6. The name hangs in the lobby like a detonation. Margaret's hand flies to her mouth. Patricia Chen's pen stops mid-sentence. A nurse passing by with a medication cart stops pushing. The fluorescent lights hum their electric monotone, indifferent to the fact that a classified call sign just got spoken out loud in a hospital lobby in Colorado Springs. Ryan opens the shadow box with both hands. Inside, mounted on velvet backing, are decorations that don't belong in a civilian hospital. A silver star sits in the center, its ribbon a deep red and white. On either side, 2 bronze stars catch the lobby light with metallic precision. Below them, 2 purple hearts, purple enamel on gold, the symbol of wounds taken in combat. The Marine Corps liaison arrives through the side entrance, a captain in dress blues carrying a leather folder worn soft with age. He doesn't introduce himself. He doesn't need to. His uniform does that work. He steps forward and begins reading from the citation inside, his voice carrying the formal cadence of official military documentation. Captain Ashley Cooper, for extraordinary heroism under fire, performed life-saving surgical interventions under sustained enemy contact resulting in 14 casualties evacuated to forward operating base Bagram. Above and beyond. Each word lands like a stone in still water. Her actions during Operation Granite Shadow saved the lives of soldiers and Allied personnel while under direct enemy fire. The citation continues, but the core message has already detonated through the lobby. This woman who was suspended yesterday for practicing outside her scope is reading as a decorated Special Forces officer who has credentials written in blood and commendation ribbons. Dr. Mercer emerges from the corridor, his voice already rising before he fully understands what he's walking into. That's fraudulent. Those credentials are fake. I'm telling you right now, that nurse is not, but he stops mid-sentence because a 2-star general in dress uniform steps forward, and every combat veteran in the room recognizes the authority before the man even moves. The general's hand rises in a salute, not casual but crisp, the kind of salute that means respect being rendered to equal rank that outmuscles your own. His palm stays pressed to his forehead for exactly 3 seconds while his eyes lock on the decorations in the shadow box. The silver star. The bronze stars. The purple hearts. When his hand comes down, his voice emerges like gravel under boots. Those are real, Doctor. And so is Captain Cooper's service record. The lobby has gone so quiet that the only sound is the ambient hum of the building's fax system and the distant beeping of monitors from the cardiac unit upstairs. Patricia Chen's face has shifted through 5 different expressions in 30 seconds, confusion, dawning horror, the specific shame of someone who has just realized they destroyed a career that was never theirs to destroy. A Pentagon investigator in a charcoal suit steps forward and hands her a folder thick with classified declassification documents. His voice is quiet, which somehow makes it more official. Captain Cooper's existence was classified under National Security Decision Directive protocols. Her service records were erased from all civilian databases in 2016 per federal order. As of 3 weeks ago, that classification was lifted. He pauses, letting that information settle into the room like sediment. We've been conducting a financial audit of Dr. Mercer's billing since yesterday, when Captain Cooper's son contacted our office. 2 federal auditors in plain suits materialize from the administrative corridor, their arms full of files seized from Mercer's office. They move with the efficiency of people who've done this before. One of them carries a photograph of Mercer's computer setup, the screen visible in the image showing phantom MRI charges coded to Medicare patients who never received imaging. The second auditor is already photographing documents inside Mercer's sealed office, evidence tape across the door frame like yellow warning. Dr. Mercer takes a step backward. Then another. His jaw works silently. He reaches for his office door and finds it sealed, finds his entire institutional power structure collapsing in real time. "This is a witch hunt," he says to the empty hallway, because everyone who might have supported him has already moved away. The security officer who escorted Ashley out yesterday is now standing near Mercer, a different expression entirely crossing his face as he understands who he actually removed from the building. Colonel Patterson's hand remains on Ashley's shoulder, a physical anchor while the world rewrites itself around her. Margaret is crying, not sad tears but the kind that come when you finally understand why someone you love has been carrying such a heavy weight in silence. The Marine Corps liaison reads another section of the citation, this time speaking directly to the gathered staff. During the tactical insertion on September 14, 2015, Captain Cooper maintained field surgical capability under fire, performing emergency thoracotomy procedures with available equipment, stabilizing for soldiers for evacuation. His voice doesn't waver. Her restraint under fire and her commitment to the protection of her team exemplifies the highest standards of military service. The federal auditor hands Patricia Chen a secondary folder. Inside are the billing codes, every phantom charge, every inflated equipment cost, every kickback arrangement cross-referenced with medical suppliers. $247,000 across 18 months. Mercer's weapon has become his noose. The bureaucratic paper trail he constructed to destroy Ashley has instead documented his own fraud with devastating precision. His bank records are being seized. His financial accounts are being frozen pending criminal investigation. His hospital privileges are suspended effective immediately pending outcome of federal inquiry. Patricia Chen's hands shake as she reads the numbers. She approved Ashley's termination yesterday on Mercer's word. She removed a decorated Special Forces officer from her hospital on the recommendation of a man committing Medicare fraud. The recognition of that mistake settles across her face like a scar. The lobby doors remain open, and beyond them is the parking lot where Ashley stared at rain last night, where she sat in her car questioning every decision that led her here. Dr. Mercer is escorted from the building by hospital security, the same protocol followed that removed Ashley exactly 24 hours earlier. The symmetry is so precise it feels choreographed by something larger than institutional procedure. He doesn't speak. His expensive watch catches the light one last time before he disappears through the exterior doors. Ryan moves to his mother's side and takes her hand. Ashley's expression hasn't shifted, her composure holding even as her classification status transforms from erased to officially restored. "You okay, Mom?" he asks quietly. She nods once, a single economical movement. "Yeah, kid. I'm okay." The words carry the kind of weight that only someone who has survived what she survived can deliver. Behind her, the Marine Corps liaison is shaking hands with Patricia Chen. The Pentagon investigator is exchanging information with hospital leadership. And in the center of the lobby, in its glass case, the wooden shadow box sits with its decorations visible to anyone who walks through the doors: silver star, bronze stars, purple hearts, and the official recognition of a woman who stopped being invisible. The next voice that comes across the hospital intercom is routine, utterly mundane in its ordinary functioning. "Paging cardiology to third floor," a receptionist announces, her tone untouched by the seismic shift that just occurred in the lobby below. But everything has changed. Everything will continue to change. Federal charges are being prepared. The fraud investigation will take 6 months. Mercer's legal team will file motions that fail. But that's Act 8, that's the epilogue, that's the part where justice becomes measured in small increments instead of grand gestures. For now, there is just this: a captain recognized. A veteran healed. A son who finally understands why his mother carried such discipline, such composure, such unbreakable calm. The lobby begins to move again, staff returning to their routines, but they move differently now, with awareness that they have just witnessed something official, something military, something that rewrites the record of who Ashley Cooper actually is. Patricia Chen meets her eyes across the lobby and nods, not an apology, not yet, but an acknowledgement of truth. Ashley returns the nod with the same military precision she's applied to every moment of her civilian life. The transformation is complete. The mask has come off. And the woman standing in Cedar Creek Medical's lobby is no longer a nurse who was suspended. She is Captain Ashley Cooper, United States Army Special Forces, restored to the official record, visible at last, and holding her son's hand while a blind veteran's presence beside her speaks louder than any citation ever could. Hit that like button if you appreciate the nurses and healthcare workers in your life. Drop a comment if you've ever worked in medicine or know someone who has. Subscribe and let's see what happens next.